In the previous class, we worked on creating the user interface for our document editor using JavaFX. The interface as shown here was laid out in a grid pane. So a grid pane was created. It included a text field for the title and a label to be placed to the left of the text field. And in order to place this label next to the text field, we used an H-box that allows us to place horizontal content. And then originally we had a text area that was used for the input of the document text. That was later in the class replaced with an HTML editor. We also had a save button. The save button was placed in an H-box so that it could be aligned to the right. We also, for the fun of it, rotated the button. In this class, we're going to update our user interface by adding a menu bar across the top of the interface. And the menu bar will contain two menus, one that says File and the other that says Help. And in each menu we'll have a set of menu items that we'll create. And because we have a menu bar, we're going to get rid of the Save button because the Save feature is going to be in the menu bar. In order to have a menu bar that goes across the top, we're going to have to change the fact that we really don't want a grid pane to be the root element of our UI. The grid pane is a good item to use to lay out these user interface elements, but if I want a menu bar that goes all the way across the top and then below it the rest of the interface, the V box, the vertical box, is going to give us what we want. So in a vertical box, we'll have a menu bar, and then the next item in the vertical box will be our original grid pane. So instead of the root element being our grid pane, we're going to have a root element which is a V box, and inside of the V box we'll put the menu bar and we'll put the grid. So the grid will no longer be our root element. To begin, I'm going to get rid of the Save button and then proceed to create a V-box and the menu. After we have the menu bar built and we have menu items, we're going to add event handlers to those menu items, and on the Open and Save menu items, we are going to implement the File Save and File Open dialogs. So let's begin. We're going to first remove the button, so the Save button and the H-box for the Save button and all of the code that goes along with that is going to be removed. And we are also going to not be adding the Save button box to the UI, so we need to get rid of that line. And since our grid pane is no longer going to be the root, I need to give it another name because I'm going to have the V-box be the root. So let's just call this our grid. So all the places where I had root before, I'm going to replace them with grid. Except for the one place where we need to still say root, and that is when we have the scene being created. The scene still needs to be created based on the root, so we're going to leave that there. So we have a grid, and the grid is set up exactly like it was before, and the UI elements we created before are still in that grid. It's just we're calling the grid pane that we created the variable for it grid rather than root. So our new root is going to be a VBox. So we'll say VBox root equals new VBox. And since we haven't used the VBox before, we need to add the import for that. So that is going to be the root for our scene, so that doesn't need to change down here where it says new scene. The root is still the variable that we want. It's just now based on the VBox instead of the grid. And inside this root, inside this VBox, the two items we're going to have are our menu bar and our existing grid. So the first thing we're going to do is create a menu bar. And where did I find out about menu bar? Well, I went to the JavaFX documentation and searched for something that looked like menus. And so here we have menu, menu bar, menu item. So a menu bar is created and menus are created, and then these menus can be added to the menu bar by using the get menus item. So that is where we are going to begin. In fact, might as well just copy paste some of this code. So I'm first going to create some menus, and I only need two of them. I'm going to have one called file and another one called help. And this final keyword that is on here we're going to talk about later. It is not needed at this point for this application. It will be something we'll learn about, but we don't need to learn about it right now. So we're going to create two menus, one called file, one called help, and we need to add the import for the menu class. And instead of calling this menu 1 and menu 3, let's label the variables for this something that makes sense. So we'll call this the file menu and the help menu. And they are both going to be placed in a menu bar. So let's create a menu bar. And that class needs to be imported as well. So JavaFX scene control menu bar. And then we need to add all of our menus that we created to the menu bar by taking the menu bar and calling get menus on it and then calling add all. So we're going to do this by using the in context help. So menu bar dot, and down in the get menus, and then we're going to say dot and add all, and we're going to add the file menu and the help menu and put a semicolon at the end. So we have a menu bar and it has a file menu and a help menu added to it. And then we also have our grid and all of the elements contained in the grid as they were before. So the next thing we need to do before we run this and take a look at it is add the grid and the menu bar to the root item, which is the VBox. So I'm going to do that here just before we create the scene, and I'm going to say root dot, and then, well, how do I add to a VBox? Well, you need to get the children, and then we can say add all, and the two elements we need to add and the order in which we want them in there is menu bar, and we need the grid. So our vertical box is going to contain a menu bar and a grid, and the grid is going to contain our title, text field, label, and HTML editor. So let's run this and see what it looks like. So we have File, we have Help. When I click on File, there aren't any menu items yet. We're going to need to add the menu items. When I make the window bigger and smaller, the menu bar goes all the way across. I do have a little issue here where I really don't want my title up against the menu bar. I want some spacing. And if you remember, the V-box has the menu bar followed by the grid that contains these items. And if I want spacing between items in a V-box or an H-box, I indicate that spacing in the constructor. So here where it says new V-box in the constructor, I'm going to indicate the spacing I want between the vertical box items. And I'll say 20. Let's see how that looks. So now I have some nice space between the menu bar and the grid that contains the rest of the document editor items. So the next step is for me to add menu items to the menus. And a menu item is just that. It's a class called menu item. And so for the file menu, I would like to have right now 3 menu items: new, open, and save. So these are going to be menu item objects. So I'll say menu item, new menu item for the file new equals new to construct one menu item, and the word we're going to put inside of that menu item is new, so that's what we're going to pass in the constructor. And because we're using menu item for the first time, we need to import it. So that is going to create a new menu item. I want 2 more menu items, so I'm just going to paste this 2 more times, and the next one is going to be the open menu item. So the word open is going to appear, and we're going to have also save menu item, and we're going to put the word save in that menu item. So we have 3 menu items. Those menu items are not contained in anything yet, and we want them contained within the file menu. So the way we do that is we take the file menu, and it has the item within it called get items. It has the method in it, get items. So get items will return a reference to the items in the menu, and on it we can add all and list the menu items that we want to add. So we have the new menu item and the open menu item, and finally the save menu item. So let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to run it, click File, and I get new, open, and save. Help currently doesn't have any sub-menu items. We're going to, though, add a couple of menu items to help. We're going to have one that says about. Let's see, if we go up here to help, they have help contents. Sometimes apps will put about information in there. Other information about the company that produced it. You can put a number of things in there. But we're going to have 2, which is documentation and about. So rather than typing that all out, I'm going to copy 2 menu items and paste them, except these are going to be called documentation menu item, and we're going to put documentation and the other one is going to be called About. Menu item, and we're going to put About. And those two menu items are going to be added to the help menu. So we're going to say help menu dot get items. It's just like doing the get menus that we did, or the get children that we did. Just turns out for the menu it's get items, and then add all, and we're going to add the documentation menu item and the about menu item. Of course, a semicolon at the end, and when we run this, file, new, open, save, help, documentation, about. So at present, our menu items appear, and we can click on them, but they don't do anything. In order for a menu item to do something, just like a button, it needs to have an event handler. So how do we do that? So for each of the menu items, we're going to add an event handler, and we're going to use the method that we've been using with buttons, which is a lambda expression. So let's begin with the new menu item, and I'm going to do this below the menu bar stuff. I'm going to say new menu item dot, and just like with our button before, there is a method called set on action, and inside of set on action we write the event handler, and we're going to do that as a lambda expression. So we're going to have a action event that gets received, and then the arrow to point to the definition of our lambda expression, an open curly brace. Didn't quite want that to go like that. Let me go back again here. Open curly brace, close curly brace, close parenthesis. And inside of the parameter that we're receiving, this is going to be an action event, and then inside of our definition right now, what's going to happen, that's inside the curly braces, we're not going to put anything yet. We're just setting it up so that each menu item is going to have a place where we can put the code for the event handler. So this takes care of the new menu item. I need this for all of the other menu items, so I'm just going to repeat this code by the number of menu items I have and then change the menu item variable. So this will be for the open, this one will be for the save, this one will be for the documentation, and this one will be for the about. So I need to change these to the respective menu items. So this is going to be open menu item action, this is going to be the save menu item, and this is going to be the documentation menu item, and finally this is going to be the about menu item. So again, inside these curly braces for each of these is where I'm going to put the code of what I want to have happen when the new open, save, documentation, or about menu items are selected. And to make sure we don't have any problems, even though this doesn't really do anything yet, I'm going to run it and make sure that everything compiles and executes okay. So everything looks good. So the next step is to cause In the case of the open and save, the appropriate file dialog to appear. And in JavaFX, we have a class that helps us do this, and it is called the File Chooser class. So I'm just going to, for now, right here above these actions, create an instance of a File Chooser object. So I'm going to put File Chooser. I'm going to name the variable that's going to hold my file chooser to be the variable file chooser, equals new file chooser. And since this is the first time I'm using a file chooser, I need to import it. So we now have a file chooser. So let's first go to the open menu item, and in there I'm going to say file chooser dot, and let's see what methods we have available to us. And here is a show open dialog, show open multiple dialog, and show save dialog. The menu item we're working with is open, so we either want the show open or show open multiple. The show open will return one file, and the show open multiple will return a list of files. And because our document interface here is for one document, not multiple at the same time, we're going to say show open dialog. And the option, or the parameter for show open dialog that it wants is the primary stage. It is the stage on which this dialog should appear, and the code, or I should say NetBeans, automatically knew that the only variable that would kind of fit that in this context is the primary stage, so it threw it in there for us, which is just fine. So what happens here is when open menu is selected, this event handler will execute this code, and this code takes the file chooser and calls show open dialog on it, and it does so within the context of the primary stage. So we're going to run this and see if that indeed is the case. File open, and voila, we have our ability to navigate around and figure out where we want to open what we want. We can find a file here, so let's say that, click open, and we return here. I can say file open, and I can hit cancel. So there are a couple of things that can happen when an open dialog is brought up. The user can select a file, or they can choose to not select a file. And so there are a couple of things I need to figure out here. First off, how do I know what file they chose? And then how do I differentiate between the situation where they chose a file and another one where they didn't choose a file? Well, it turns out file chooser returns a file object, so I can represent that as file, the variable equals. So file is going to be the variable that's going to hold the file if one is chosen that is chosen from the open dialog. Because we're using file for the first time, we need to import it from Java.io file. So that is, file is going to hold the file that it was selected, unless there wasn't one selected. In that case, then file would be null. So the right right way to handle this is to say if file not equal to null, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, they chose cancel and we don't need to do anything at all and we can move on. So let's now go to the Save menu. We can use the same file chooser object, but instead of the show open, we're going to select a different option. So I'm going to say here file chooser dot. We're going to go down to our options and it's show save dialog because we're in the Save menu. And just like the show open dialog, it needs to know which stage this is to be displayed on, and we called our stage primary stage, so that is the right choice. And so now let's run this and see what that looks like. So file, save, and now we have a save as dialog. And just like before, we have the option to make a selection, enter a name, or not enter a name, and hit cancel, in which case we need to detect that situation. And it's going to work just like it did for the show open dialog. The file chooser is going to return a file, and we then are going to check to see if it is null or not. And if the file is not null, then we're going to take some action. So what we've achieved is creating a UI that's an improvement on our previous document editor that contains a menu bar with two menus on it, and then each menu has some menu items, new open save, and help documentation about. And for the file open and for the file save, we have implemented the appropriate dialogues to let the user select what file they want to open or where they want to save the file. In order to achieve this UI layout, we used a V-box, vertical box, and the first item in the V-box is our menu bar, and the second item is the same grid that we created during the last class, which then contains the other UI elements for our document editor.